Why did everyone go quiet the moment she said, "Abort"? At 10,000 feet, silence wasn't peaceful. It was fragile, like glass stretched thin over stone. Lieutenant Alina Vance lay prone on the ridge they called the Needle, her body pressed flat against granite polished smooth by centuries of wind. Every breath burned, not from fear, but from altitude, from the weight of a rifle that had already cut into her collarbone during the 4-hour climb, from knowing she was alone where no one else could survive long. Below her, the canyon, Devil's Throat, waited. It wasn't just a name, it was a warning. Her scope hovered over the village like an unblinking eye. Mud brick buildings clung to the canyon floor as if afraid of falling. No movement, no voices, no animals grazing. Too quiet. "Viking, this is Wraith," she whispered. "Confirm position at phase line Alpha." Static cracked. Then Master Chief Sorensen's voice, steady, confident. "Solid copy. Stack is set. Breach in 2 mics." Alina didn't respond immediately. She scanned again. Roof lines, courtyards, goat pens. The goats were pressed tight against the walls. Animals did that when something hunted nearby. Her gut tightened. "Viking, hold." A pause. She could almost hear the team below exchanging glances. "We're on the clock," Sorensen said. "You seeing threats?" "No PID," she answered carefully. "But the atmospherics are wrong. No civilians, no movement. It feels staged." Another pause, longer this time. Alina knew what they were thinking. She was Army, an attachment, a shooter with credentials, sure, but not one of them. Respect didn't stop the mission clock. "Copy," Viking said at last. "Keep eyes high, we're going." Her jaw tightened. She adjusted her parallax, forcing her focus past the target building and up the scree slopes beyond. The canyon walls curved inward like a bowl, concave, smooth, a perfect whispering gallery. Sound didn't die here. It traveled. "Breach in 3. Her finger hovered outside the trigger guard. 2. That's when she saw it. A flicker, not movement, heat. A thin bloom on the opposite ridge, unnatural, controlled. A barrel. "Abort," Alina snapped, breaking radio discipline. "Viking, abort ambush." The charge detonated. The door blew inward. And the canyon screamed. RPGs tore down from above, 3 of them perfectly timed. Fire blossomed in the courtyard. The night shattered into chaos. Contact front, contact left. Gunfire echoed and multiplied, bouncing until it sounded like an army. Alina didn't freeze. She worked. The bolts cycled, the rifle settled. Her breathing slowed, not because she was calm, but because panic had no value here. "Viking, sitrep. Pinned, 2 wounded. We're in a kill box." She already knew. Enemy fighters lined the ridges on both sides, firing downward, plunging fire, no cover. Alina tracked a thermal bloom shifting left, range, angle, wind. She didn't think. She fired. The first insurgent dropped before the sound reached him. Another replaced him instantly. "Hydra." Her jaw clenched. "This wasn't a logistics hub," she murmured. "It's a lure." The seals blew through a wall, flooding inside the structure. Fire slackened. The enemy lost eyes. For a moment there was silence. Then a deeper boom echoed from the canyon mouth. Rock dust rose like a curtain. "They sealed the pass," Alina said quietly. "They bottled you." The realization settled like a weight on her chest. Outnumbered, outgunned, trapped. Command denied air support, cloud cover, MA and PADS, bureaucratic distance wrapped in radio static. And then Viking said the words she'd been dreading. "Wraith, we need a miracle." Alina shifted her scope north. She saw the DSHK heavy machine gun coming online. Massive, patient, final. If it fired uninterrupted, the building would become dust. She ranged it. 900 meters, shielded, impossible. I can't hit the gunner, she admitted. Then find a way, Viking said, because if you don't, we die. For the first time, Elena closed her eyes. Not from fear. From memory. From every lecture about sound, about bullets, about how the canyon bent physics like a lie. She opened them again. And smiled just barely. I'm going to try something, she whispered. She wasn't aiming at the enemy. She was aiming at the canyon itself. The rifle cracked. Stone shattered. Sound lied. The DSHK gunner swung his barrel toward an enemy that didn't exist. Elena exhaled. Time bought, not safety. Time. She watched the enemy flinch, reposition, hesitate. And she knew this would not end with heroics. Only with choices. And consequences. Sometimes survival wasn't about killing. Sometimes it was about being believed. Why did the canyon go silent right after she saved them? Not the peaceful kind, the waiting kind. Elena felt it before she understood it, the way sound thinned, the way even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Silence like this wasn't absence, it was preparation. Her cheek was pressed to the stock, granite biting through her sleeve, pulse hammering in her neck. Below, the seals were alive. For now. She had bent sound, fooled a machine gun, rewritten the battlefield for less than a minute. That minute was already bleeding out. Wraith, Viking said quietly, too quietly, what did you just do? Elena didn't answer right away. Her eyes were sweeping the canyon rim, methodical, forced, north to south, high to low, grid, discipline over fear. I lied to them, she finally said, with physics. A breath, then Viking laughed once short, disbelieving. Remind me never to argue math with you. But even as he said it, she heard the edge underneath. He knew what she knew. Tricks don't last. The DSHK crew was shouting now, confused, angry. They were raking an empty ridge, chewing stone where no one stood. Dust plumed, tracers stitched nothing. Elena checked her magazine. 4 rounds fired. 5 left. Her jaw tightened. Viking, she said, lowering her voice. They're adjusting. This buys you movement, not safety. Copy, we're shifting deeper inside. She tracked movement in the wash below the compound and felt her stomach drop. No. Viking, eyes up, she warned. South side, 15 fighters, bounding movement, they're coming through the ravine. Static, then, say again. They'll be on your rear wall in 2 minutes. The fighters weren't panicked. They weren't spraying rounds. They moved like they'd done this before, using dead ground, covering each other, patient. Professionals. Elena shifted her hips, granite biting hard enough to draw a hiss. Her suppressor shimmered with heat. Mirage danced above the barrel, warping the world. 15 men. 5 rounds. She didn't feel fear. She felt calculation. If she engaged directly, she'd reveal herself. If she stayed silent, the seals would be flanked and cut apart. She couldn't kill them all. So she didn't try. She scanned left past the ravine to a concave overhang of smooth rock shaped like an amphitheater. A geological accident, a gift. Viking, she murmured, voice steady as stone. Do not engage south, I'm sending a ghost. What? She didn't explain. She waited until the radio man reached the center of the formation, not because he was important, but because people listened to him. She aimed above them, past them, at the rock. Breathe. Pause. Squeeze. The shot cracked over their heads, sonic boom slapping the ravine before the bullet shattered against stone behind them. The sound came from the wrong place. Contact rear. She saw it in their body language before she heard it in her imagination. Heads snapping around, rifles swinging the wrong way. She cycled the bolt. Again. This time she aimed front left, another rock, another lie. Now the sound came from everywhere. They froze, dove wrong, backs exposed to a threat that didn't exist. She watched discipline fracture into doubt. "They're stopping," she reported. "They think they're surrounded." "How long does that hold?" Viking asked. "Until they realize no one's dying," Alina said, "or until they do the math." Her hand brushed her ammo pouch. Too light. She'd bought time, not victory. And time was expensive. The sun crept higher, light pouring into the canyon like an accusation. Shadows shifted, turning rocks into enemies, enemies into ghosts. She scanned again, and found stillness where there shouldn't be any. High on the opposite ridge, a straight line, too straight, glass glinting. A sniper. Her skin prickled. He wasn't aiming at the seals. He was hunting her. "Viking," she whispered, "I'm being hunted." Silence. "Then we need eyes, Wraith." "If I look up," she said calmly, "I die." She slid backward, inch by inch, leaving the rifle forward like bait. Her heart hammered, loud enough she was sure he could hear it. Move and die. Stay and die. She rolled into a shallow depression. Breath ragged now despite her control. Cold sweat turned icy against her spine. She needed him to shoot. She needed him greedy. Her helmet lay beside her, off for a better cheek weld earlier. She stared at it. Then she stared at the stick of deadwood half buried in shale. It was crude, old, ugly. It would have to work. She jammed brush into the helmet cover, stuffed her hydration bladder inside for weight, crawled forward again, muscles screaming, pushing the helmet on the stick just above the ridge line. Just enough. 1 inch. 2. She held it there, arms trembling. Come on, she thought, take it. The crack came sharp and final. The helmet exploded. Water sprayed her face like blood. Alina rolled, violent, practiced, slamming back into position as the enemy sniper cycled his bolt. She saw the smoke, saw the thermal bloom fade. Got you. She didn't rush the shot. She breathed. She accounted for wind, angle, spin, drift, the slow turning of the earth itself, because this wasn't about speed. It was about ending a threat that had chosen her. She squeezed. The rifle kicked. 1.8 seconds felt like an eternity. Then the body snapped backward, heat blooming across stone. Sniper down, she breathed, north side clear. Relief surged, brief, dangerous. Because relief made people sloppy. And the canyon punished that. A scream tore through her open monitor channel, not English, panic, accusation. He is dead. The demon is on the needle. Her blood ran cold. The dead sniper's radio was keyed, hot mic, broadcasting her location to everyone. Every gun turned. Viking, she shouted, I'm blown, they know where I am. The mortars answered first. The ridge hissed, then erupted. The blast lifted her off the ground, slammed her chest into stone. Air vanished from her lungs. Rocks rained down. She crawled blind, desperate, into a narrow fissure she'd marked hours ago. Darkness, guano dust. Radio dead. Then she saw it. Through a gap in stone, she watched the seals stacking to move. About to sprint into a PKM kill zone she could see, and they couldn't. No, she whispered, no, no. She grabbed her scope, caught the sun, flashed light down the canyon. Stop. Viking froze. Hands signal back. Acknowledgement. Then Viking signaled something else. Winchester. They were out. Her fingers went numb. 1 mag left. Per man or total. Mortars walked closer. Time was no longer ticking. It was collapsing. And Alina realized something she hadn't let herself think before. This mission wasn't about killing anymore. It was about choosing who lived. and who carried the weight of it afterward? Why did she whisper an apology before she pulled the trigger? Alina already knew the answer before the thought fully formed, because once she did this, there would be no clean ending, no version of the story where everyone walked away untouched. The mortars were getting closer. Each round landed with a sickening rhythm, hiss, thump, concussion, walking their fire up the ridge like someone counting her down. Pebbles skittered past her cheek. Dust coated her teeth. Somewhere below, the seals were silent now, crouched behind collapsing mud walls with empty rifles and no sky left to pray to. She looked through the scope again. The enemy wasn't probing anymore. They were charging. 30, maybe 40. They abandoned cover, screaming as they ran, flooding out of the ravine toward the buried compound. It wasn't tactical. It was final. A medieval rush meant to overwhelm with bodies and knives. Alina checked her rifle. 3 rounds in the magazine. Another partial mag, maybe 8 more. She could kill the first man, the second, the third. Then what? The rest would pour over the building like ants over sugar. She scanned upward, heart pounding, not from fear but from refusal. Refusal to accept this ending. And that's when she saw it. Above the charging fighters, 50 meters upslope, the mountain itself waited, an ugly, unstable shelf of loose scree pinned in place by a jagged spur of white quartz. Tons of rock held together by frost, friction, and the stubborn illusion of permanence. A keystone. She swallowed. The seals were inside the structure, thick mud walls, low roof. If the slope slid, it would bury the courtyard, slam into the rear wall, collapse exits. But the interior might hold. Might. If she did nothing, they died for certain. If she did this. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not to the enemy, not to command. To the men below who had trusted her without seeing her face. She dialed down, short range, steep angle. The enemy wave was 50 meters from the door. She fired. The bullet struck the base of the quartz spur. White dust puffed. Nothing happened. Her heart lurched. She cycled the bolt. Again. The second round slammed into the same fracture. For half a second, the mountain seemed to consider it. Then it moved. A deep grinding groan rolled through the canyon, low, ancient, inevitable. Cracks raced up the quartz like lightning. The spur sheared free, hesitated in midair, then gravity claimed it. The slope followed. Pebbles became rocks. Rocks became a river. The mountain came down. The charging fighters stopped dead, terror cutting through their momentum as they looked up at the sky collapsing. Some turned, some ran. None outran it. The scree roared into the valley, swallowing the lead element, smashing into the compound with bone-rattling force. The building groaned. Stone piled up, burying doors and windows, sealing everything beneath a choking cloud of gray dust. Alina held her breath. Her scope filled with nothing but swirling ash. "Viking," she whispered into the dead radio. "Viking." Silence. Seconds stretched. Then movement. A hand punched through the debris, then a helmet. Viking dragged himself up onto what used to be the roof, now level with the new slope, gray from head to toe, coughing violently, but alive. Her knees nearly buckled. They were alive. Buried. Trapped. Exposed. And she had 1 round left in her magazine. The dust drifted away, revealing the aftermath. Bodies half buried, survivors scrambling back into cover, chaos but not retreat. Someone was shouting. She found him near a battered hillocks, tall, composed, holding a radio. The commander. She centered her crosshairs on his chest. Easy shot. Then he grabbed someone from the shadows. A woman in a bright blue burqa. A child clinging to her leg. Elena's finger froze. The commander positioned himself behind them, peering over the woman's shoulder. Human shields. Her throat tightened. At 700 meters, with heat mirage boiling the air, the margin for error was unforgiving. An inch off and the bullet would strike innocents. Take the shot, a dark voice whispered. 6 lives for 2, simple math. Her sister's face flashed in her mind, standing in a driveway in Ohio, holding a red balloon, trusting the world not to hurt her. Elena exhaled, trembling. The woman shifted, the child stumbled. The gap vanished. The commander dove for cover. Target lost. She stared at the empty space, a hollow ache blooming in her chest. She had kept her soul. And possibly doomed her team. The mortars fired again. One round hit just above the buried roof, showering the exposed seals with razor-sharp granite. Bodies flew. Viking status, she screamed. Static, then Doc's voice shaking. Viking is down, massive hemorrhage, we are exposed. Elena found him through the scope. Viking lay on his back, clutching his neck, blood turning the dust black. The team froze, leaderless, caught between fear and fire. Drag him now, she ordered, behind the chimney stack. They moved. Barely. She switched to SATCOM, voice breaking through the thin air. Command, this is Wraith. Urgent medevac, surgical. Denied. DSHK still active. Neutralize the threat. Then we launch. She stared at the radio, hatred burning. Viking's voice came back, wet, fatting. You need to take over. I'm here, she said softly. Stay with me. You have the eyes, he rasped. Get my boys out. The weight settled on her shoulders, cold, absolute. I have the con, she said, voice hardening. All stations, listen up. She gave orders, calm, precise, because panic was contagious and she couldn't afford it. Then Viking whispered, protocol, Omega. The Alamo. Escape and evade, leave them. Tears blurred her vision. I'm not leaving you. That's an order, he said weakly. Go home. The line went dead. Elena rested her forehead against the stock, hands shaking. Then she looked back through the scope. The mortar pit. 850 meters, tucked behind a rusted BTR. She had 5 rounds left. And one impossible angle. She aimed at the road. Not the enemy. She whispered to the bullet like a prayer and squeezed. The round skipped, deflected under the vehicle, and detonated the ammo stack behind it. The explosion lifted the BTR off the ground. The mortar threat vanished in fire. Mortars neutralized, she breathed. The enemy paused, then regrouped, and began moving again. She checked her rifle. 4 rounds. The canyon filled with bodies. She didn't aim at them. She aimed at the canyon. 4 shots. Vast. North wall, east spire, valley floor, ridge line. The echoes collided, multiplied, turned the canyon into a thunder chamber. The enemy broke. They thought reinforcements had arrived. They ran. Elena cycled the bolt. Click. Empty. She was Winchester. Far off, rotors thumped. Blackhawks. Relief surged, then died. The DSHK roared back to life, stitching the sky with green tracers. The birds peeled away. Suppress that gun or we RTB. Elena clawed at the dirt. Found 1 round. 1. She stood. Threw a strobe. Made herself visible. The DSHK swung toward her. She fired. The gun fell silent. Then something hit her hard. The world spun. Sky. Rock. Silence. As she lay staring at the stars, lungs refusing to work, she heard the rotors return. And she smiled just a little. Because sometimes, survival wasn't about walking away. Sometimes, it was about standing up when there was nothing left. Why did she laugh when she realized she couldn't feel her legs? It wasn't hysteria, it was recognition. Elena lay on her back where the ridge had finally broken her fall, helmet gone, rifle somewhere downslope, the sky rotating slowly above her like a detached thought. Every breath felt borrowed. Her body was there, but distant, like it belonged to someone else now. She tried to move her feet. Nothing answered. Of course, she murmured, lips barely moving. That's how it ends. The pain came late, rolling in thick and heavy, blooming from her spine outward. It wasn't sharp. It was deep. The kind that told you something essential had shifted permanently. Below her, rotors thundered closer, chopping the thin air. The Blackhawks were coming in hot now, angry, reckless, committed. Green tracers reached up toward them, but the gun that had dominated the canyon was silent. Smoke curled where it had been. She had done that. The thought didn't bring pride, just relief. Her radio crackled, faint but alive, someone shouting her call sign, repeating it like a prayer. She forced breath into her lungs. Wraith up, she croaked, mostly. Stay with us, a voice ordered, not Viking. Someone new, younger, too young to be carrying this. She wanted to tell him not to worry, that she'd been tired long before the bullet hit her, that some days you carried the weight easily and other days it carried you. Instead, she stared at the sky. She thought of the first time she'd felt truly invisible. The briefing room at Fort Carson, long table, coffee gone cold. She sat at the end, back straight, notes untouched, listening as men talked over her. She offered an alternative ingress route, quieter, slower, safer. They'd smiled politely, then ignored her. Later, when the mission went sideways, someone had said, "We should have listened." No apology, just hindsight. She wondered if they'd listen now. The rotors screamed overhead. Ropes dropped. Seals poured out like shadows, weapons up, moving with brutal grace. Medics sprinted. One of them reached her, eyes widening at the sight of her twisted legs. "Don't cut the pants yet," Elena whispered. "I like those." The medic blinked, then smiled despite himself. "Roger that, ma'am." As they worked, she felt hands, pressure, movement, but it all came through layers of numbness. Someone jammed a needle into her arm. The world softened at the edges. She caught fragments through the haze. Viking stable. Lost a lot of blood. If she hadn't. Never seen anything like it. She closed her eyes. Not to sleep. To remember. She remembered her father teaching her to hunt in the Appalachian foothills. How he'd taught her to listen before she looked. How he'd said, "The loudest thing in the woods is a man who doesn't belong." She remembered the first time she'd fired a rifle in anger. Not at a target, not at a silhouette, but at another human being. How her hands hadn't shaken until afterward. How she'd sat alone behind a HESCO barrier and cried quietly, ashamed not of the act, but of how quickly she'd adapted. She remembered choosing the sniper course because it was the loneliest path, because loneliness felt honest. The stretcher lifted. Pain surged white, consuming, then dulled again. As they carried her toward the bird, she saw Viking. He was pale, wrapped in bandages, eyes half-lidded but open. He turned his head when she passed. Recognition flickered. He tried to speak. She leaned close, voice barely there. "Don't, you're alive, that's enough." His fingers twitched, brushing hers. "Hell of a ghost," he whispered. She smiled. The ramp closed. Darkness swallowed them. The Blackhawk lurched skyward, leaving the canyon behind. For the first time since the mission began, Elena felt the weight lift. Not because it was over, but because she no longer had to hold it alone. She woke in a hospital bed to the sound of rain against glass. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was too white, the air too clean, the pain too orderly. Then she tried to move. Nothing. The doctor didn't soften it. Spinal trauma, incomplete injury, prognosis uncertain. "Will I walk?" Elena asked. The doctor hesitated. "I don't know," he said. She nodded. Not knowing was familiar. They brought her medals, citations, words polished until they shone. She listened politely, thanked them, set the ribbons aside untouched. They felt heavy. Viking visited 3 weeks later, moving slow, a cane in his hand. He stood awkwardly at the foot of her bed, suddenly unsure of himself. "You saved my team," he said, "every one of them." Elena looked out the window. Rain traced crooked paths down the glass. "I made choices," she said. "Some people lived, some didn't." "That's war," Viking said. She shook her head slightly. "That's life. War just makes it louder." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "They're changing doctrine. Canyon acoustics, counter-ambush protocols. You're in the manual now." She closed her eyes. Being remembered wasn't the same as being understood. After he left, she lay there, listening to the rain, wondering who she was now without the rifle, without the ridge, without the silence that had once defined her. She felt broken. And worse, she felt unnecessary. That night she dreamed of the canyon again, but this time she wasn't on the ridge. She was standing at the bottom, unarmed, listening as echoes circled her like questions without answers. She woke with tears on her face. And for the first time, she let herself cry. Not for the mission, not for the men she'd killed, but for the woman she'd been, and the uncertainty of becoming someone else. Why did the silence frighten her more than the gunfire ever had? Because silence, this kind of silence, didn't need her. Elena learned that slowly, in inches, in hours that stretched longer than patrols ever had, in mornings where the sun rose exactly on time and no one needed her to explain why. The rehab wing smelled like antiseptic and patience. Machines hummed softly, indifferent to rank or reputation. Here there were no call signs, no grids, no urgency. Just effort. "Again," the therapist said gently, kneeling beside her. "Even if nothing moves, tell your body what you want." Elena stared at her feet. They lay there like borrowed objects, still, pale, unresponsive. She concentrated until her temples throbbed. Imagined the signal traveling down her spine, past the damage, into muscle and bone. Nothing. Her hands curled into fists. "Again," she said through clenched teeth. The therapist didn't rush her, didn't pity her. That mattered more than Elena wanted to admit. Afterward, alone in her room, she replayed the canyon in her head, not the chaos but the moments before. The quiet, the waiting, the feeling that everything depended on what she did next. Here, nothing did. That terrified her. Letters came, some from the team, some from people she'd never met. "You saved my brother. Because of you, my kids still have a father. They said you stood up when there was nothing left." She read them once, then stacked them in a drawer she never opened again. She didn't know how to carry gratitude when it came wrapped in someone else's survival. Viking called every few days. Sometimes they talked about nothing, sometimes about everything except the canyon. One afternoon, he said, "They want you to brief." Elena laughed. It came out brittle. "I can't even stand." "They don't care," he said. "They want your mind." Her mind. She rolled the words around like a foreign language. "I don't know if I'm still useful," she said quietly. Viking didn't answer right away. Then, "You were never just a trigger." The line went quiet after that. She stared at the phone long after the call ended, feeling something loosen in her chest, just a little. The nightmares changed. Less blood, more faces. The woman in the blue burqa, the child's wide eyes, the commander disappearing into shadow because Elena had chosen not to pull the trigger. In the dream, the child looked back at her. Not accusing, just remembering. Alina woke shaking, heart racing, the moral weight heavier than any rucksack she'd ever carried. Some nights she wondered if she'd been wrong, if math should have one, if mercy was just another kind of selfishness. During one therapy session, frustration boiled over. "This isn't who I am," Alina snapped, tears burning. "I don't belong here." The therapist met her gaze. "Who were you?" Alina opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The answer had always been simple before. Sniper, soldier, ghost. Now it felt unfinished. Weeks passed, then months. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the floor, her toe twitched. Barely. So small she almost missed it. She stared, breath held. "Do it again," she whispered. Nothing. Disappointment hit hard, but beneath it something else stirred. Hope. Fragile, dangerous, but real. At the briefing, she spoke from a wheelchair, laser pointer steady despite the tremor in her hand. She didn't dramatize, didn't glorify. She talked about sound, about terrain, about listening to the places people ignored, about how arrogance got men killed faster than bullets. The room was silent when she finished. Then someone in the back said, "Why didn't you take the shot on the commander?" The question cut deep. Alina met his eyes. "Because I didn't want to live the rest of my life knowing I chose efficiency over humanity," she said. "Some costs don't show up on the mission report." No one argued. Afterward, a young female lieutenant approached her, nervous, determined. "They told me I should switch tracks," she said, "that I'm too quiet, too careful." Alina smiled softly. "Don't let them confuse quiet with weak." The lieutenant nodded, eyes bright. As she rolled back to her quarters, Alina realized something had shifted. She still couldn't run, still couldn't stand, but she mattered. Not because of what she could do with a rifle, but because of what she'd learned when she couldn't use one. That night she opened the drawer. Read the letters again. This time she didn't flinch. She let the gratitude in. Not as praise, as responsibility. Months later, she returned to the canyon. Not as a ghost, as an observer. The mountains were unchanged, ancient, unimpressed. She listened to the echoes. They sounded different now. Less like voices, more like questions. And she was finally ready to answer them. Why did she feel whole only when she stopped trying to be who she was? The canyon didn't greet her. It never had. Alina sat at the edge of Devil's Throat, wheels locked, hands resting on her knees as the wind tugged at her hair. No rifle, no radio pressed to her ear, no illusion that she controlled what happened here. Just stone, sky, memory. The mountains looked the same as they had that day, indifferent, ancient, unchanged by human intention. That used to comfort her. Now it reminded her of something harder. Survival didn't mean staying the same. She closed her eyes and listened. The echoes came, soft at first, wind slipping through rock, a bird's wings cutting air, distant movement that might have been imagination. Once she'd bent those echoes into weapons, used them to deceive, to save, to kill. Now she let them pass through her without grabbing hold. Behind her, boots crunched on gravel. She didn't turn. "I thought you might come back," Viking said. He stood beside her, older now, slower, still solid. She nodded. "I needed to see it without the scope." They watched the canyon in silence for a long time. Finally, Viking spoke. "They teach your case study at Bud S now, you know that." She smiled faintly. "I know." "They don't call it heroics," he added. "They call it restraint." That word settled in her chest like a stone, finding its place. "I used to think restraint was what happened when you were afraid," Alina said. Now I think it's what happens when you understand the cost. Viking nodded. You changed how we fight. She shook her head slowly. I changed how I listen. The wind rose, carrying sound along the canyon walls. For a moment, it felt like the place was breathing. I used to believe my worth was tied to being useful, she said quietly, to being necessary. And now, Viking asked. She thought of the young lieutenant who'd written to her last week, said she'd stayed the course, said she'd learned to trust quiet instincts instead of fighting them. She thought of the child in the blue burqa, somewhere out there, alive, growing up with a story that didn't include a sniper's bullet. Now I think worth is what you choose not to take, Alina said. Not every trigger needs to be pulled. Not every silence needs to be filled. Viking exhaled slowly. You sound at peace. She considered that. I'm learning, she said. Peace isn't something you earn, it's something you practice. They left the canyon as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long and forgiving across the stone. Years later, Alina stood before a small group of trainees, men and women, young and eager, some trying too hard to prove they belonged. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. Everyone here wants to be loud when it matters, she told them. Fast, decisive, unquestioned. She paused, letting the silence work. But the moments that define you won't feel heroic. They'll feel lonely, uncertain, quiet. She met their eyes, one by one. And when that moment comes, ask yourself not what you can take from the world, but what you're willing to carry afterward. They listened, because she wasn't asking them to admire her. She was asking them to think. Afterward, she rolled out into the sunlight, feeling the warmth on her face. Her legs still didn't move the way they once had. Maybe they never would. But she no longer measured herself by that. At home, she kept no medals on the wall, no photographs of the canyon, just a single framed sentence written in her own hand. Listen before you act. Some nights she still dreamed of echoes. But now they didn't chase her. They guided her. And when people asked what it was like, being outnumbered, outgunned, alone on a ridge with no way out, she didn't talk about fear or fire or the men she'd killed. She talked about choice, about the space between impulse and action, about the dignity of restraint. Because sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do isn't to strike. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.